Are Western car makers ready to face off against China in the electric vehicle market? Stellantis CEO believes there's a looming battle ahead. What does this mean for the future of electric cars? Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares has warned that tariffs on Chinese vehicles imported to Europe and the United States could be a big mistake. He said these tariffs are a major trap for the countries that go on that path. According to tariffs, these tariffs won't help Western car makers avoid changes. They will still need to restructure to compete with the cheaper Chinese manufacturers. The challenge from China is real, and it won't be solved by just putting up trade barriers. The European Commission will announce a decision on possible tariffs for Chinese electric vehicle imports on June the 5th. Meanwhile, the United States has stated it will impose 100% duties to stop Chinese EV shipments. In response, China has threatened to counter tariffs. Tavares mentioned that when trying to compete with Chinese manufacturers, who have a 30% cost advantage, there will be social consequences. He added that European governments do not want to face this reality right now. The European Commission is expected to increase tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, leading to talks that China executives hope will ease the impact on the industry. China's electric vehicle industry needs to export to the world's third largest economy to make up for failing profits at home. German car makers, on the other hand, want access to China's auto market and partnerships to lower costs. If the European Union adds an extra 10% tariff on top of the current 10%, it would cost China EV exporters around $1 billion based on 2023 trade data. This cost is expected to rise as Chinese EV makers increase exports to Europe this year. In the past, EU investigations into subsidies on Chinese imports of other products. This have led to extra duties between 9% to 26% for companies cooperating with the investigation. Analysts think EV tariffs will be similar. These duties would start in early July but could be applied retrospectively for the past 3 months. China is preparing for the upcoming negotiations. The EU's provisional duties could be contested or possibly dropped if enough EU government oppose them after 4 months. Last week, the Chinese Chamber of Commerce to the EU, a trade group, mentioned that Beijing is thinking about increasing tariffs on large engine car imports to 25%. Additionally, China has suggested lowering tariffs on EU car imports from 15% to 10%. The European Commission has informed BYD, SAIC and Geely that they did not provide enough information for its subsidy investigation. This lack of information could lead to higher tariffs for these companies, setting a benchmark for tariffs on the rest of the Chinese EV industry. The trade group argued that the investigation was flawed from the beginning and asked for information that Chinese automakers couldn't provide. This included details on suppliers like CATL, who were not part of the investigation, according to someone familiar with the matter. CATL did not immediately respond to a request for comment. This was a move denounced by Elon Musk of Tesla, who had previously warned that Chinese automakers were set to demolish most other car companies. Tesla, the biggest EV exporter from China, also faces the risk of higher tariffs from the EU. Amid trade tensions and changes, European car makers have joined forces with newer Chinese EV manufacturers to bring electric vehicles to the market faster and cheaper. Volkswagen and BMW, for example, pledged over $5 billion in April to boost research and production in China. Trade data from 2023 shows that nearly 29% of cars made by German automakers were sold in China. Meanwhile, European Union officials have been investigating China's subsidies for its domestic EV markets for several months now. In response, China has threatened to retaliate against the West with its tariffs. The CEO of the company behind brands like Jeep, Dodge and Alfa Romeo added that "We are not talking about a Darwinian period, we are in it," and that the price war with Chinese rivals would be very tough. In recent years, Chinese car exports have seen a significant increase. Japan, which was previously the world's top exporter of cars since 2017, lost that title to China in 2023. According to the International Energy Agency, an intergovernment group, about 60% of global EV sales come from China's car industry. Stellantis is a unique station. While many car makers partner with Chinese companies, Stellantis announced a first-of-its-kind step last week. In September, it will start selling EVs made through its joint venture with Leap Motors outside of China. Stellantis owns about 21% of the joint venture, Leap Motors International BV, which will begin selling cars in 9 countries this year. However, both Europe and China have reasons to seek a deal. China's EV industry needs profitable exports to the world's third largest economy to offset failing profits at home, while German automakers want access to China's auto market and EV partnerships to lower costs. Each additional 10% increase in European Union tariffs on top of the existing 10% levy would cost China's EV exporters about $1 billion based on 2023 trade data. This cost is expected to rise as Chinese EV makers expand exports to Europe this year. China has signalled that it is preparing for the negotiations ahead. The EU's provision duties could be challenged or even dropped if enough EU governments oppose them after 4 months. Earlier this year, electric car enthusiasts Anders Berner excitedly opened the door of a BYD Seal for a test drive near Copenhagen, Denmark. He was already impressed by how quickly Chinese EV makers like BYD Auto had advanced. Many Chinese EVs are made with excellent materials and are well built. They are high quality cars, he said. And in terms of battery technology for EVs, Chinese companies are leading the field. Berner is among those who believe Chinese EVs have what it takes to dominate the global car market. Compared to Western brands, Chinese EVs have an edge in affordability. In the European Union, Chinese EVs usually cost 20% less than EU-made models, according to the European Commission. Chinese battery maker CATL, which supplied Tesla, Volkswagen, BMW and Chinese EV makers, provide about 40% of the world's EV batteries. In late April, they introduced the first battery with a range of over 1,000 kilometers on a single charge. Chinese EVs are increasingly making their mark overseas. Shenzhen-based BYD sold 525,409 EVs worldwide in the last quarter of last year, surpassing Tesla's 484,507 units to become the biggest electric car company. China nearly overtook Japan as the world's largest car exporter, with 5.22 million vehicles sold overseas. In the European Union, Chinese EVs boosted their market share to 8.2% in 2023, up from 0.5% in 2019. The European Federation for Transport and Environment expects the market share of Chinese EVs to rise to 11% this year and up to 20% by 2027. US President Joe Biden has vowed not to let Chinese car makers flood the US market. He sees China's industrial policy as a national security threat. "I'm not going to let that happen on my watch," Biden said in March. Although Chinese EV makers have a tiny market share in the US, Biden announced in May that he would quadruple tariffs on Chinese EVs to 100% and triple tariffs on Chinese lithium-ion batteries to 25%. The EU shares similar concerns as the US. The EU Commission announced new duties of 17.4% to 38.1% would be imposed on Chinese EVs starting July 4th, unless Beijing addresses subsidies that the EU says distorts the market. These tariffs, introduced after a probe launched in October, are in addition to existing 10% duties. Combined, these tariffs nearly reach the 50% mark that research provider Rhodium Group says is needed to curb Chinese EV imports. So do you think Chinese EVs are a real threat to the EU? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, hit like and subscribe button. Until next time, see you all later.